it really is that idea of how are you going to grow today rather than what might you be educated on? What will you learn rather than what are you going to be taught?
Welcome to Toddle School Leaders Project. On today's episode of the podcast, we welcome Matt Pitman. He's an Australian Distinguished Educator and the author of the Connection Curriculum. So, in today's episode, we dive into the idea of connection and belonging in schools, and we unpack Matt's framework for exactly how we do that. How do we manage change and grow schools into spaces where everyone feels a sense of connection and belonging? You're not going to want to miss a single second, so let's jump right into this conversation with Matt. Matt, I am so excited to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me. This is really exciting.
Can you give us a little bit of just background, who you are, the work that you do that you're passionate about?
So I am a secondary educator and I've been in leadership positions for just over a decade. So 14 years as a teacher and about 12 or 13 of those in leadership. I got the opportunity to be in a leadership position really early on, which was really challenging, but obviously really rewarding as well. And so working through some of those challenges as a younger leader certainly set up for, I think, a little bit more success as an older leader and stepping into middle leadership and then just recently into senior leadership. I study and read probably too much because I just love reading books and I love looking through the findings sections on journals. I don't read all of the journal. I just want to know what they found and what I can do with it. And so I think that was part of the inspiration for a book that I recently wrote and had published this year. Thank you. Called The Connection Curriculum. And I think it's, post-COVID, the thing that drives me is action and trying to inspire action, trying to encourage people to think that they can do things and they can make change rather than perhaps looking to others to drive that. Teachers, leaders, support staff, parents, students, we're all in this together. We can all enact change, and that's the thing that drives me.
Very cool. I'm so excited about your book, The Connection Curriculum. But I was curious when I first picked it up, I was like, connection, are we talking about conceptual, like academic connection, social connection, all of the above? Tell us a little bit more about the book.
So it's definitely everything. It's an all-encompassing approach because I think we have to integrate the conceptual and the academic because we're trying to encourage students to see the links between what they're learning and real life. And, if they can't apply what they're learning to perhaps not even a real world context, but their own context as a young person, then it's not, no matter how important it might be to them in the future, it's not going to be important to them now when they need to learn it. So if we want them to see links between disciplines and we want them to see how their interests can fold into their own learning, then it has to be all encompassing. But at the same time, connection is obviously about bringing people together, something that schools either do really, really well or they do really poorly. And I think as we've continued to follow this really similar model of education that we've had for decades and decades, it's really shifted even more so into numbers and ranks and academic results. And that is not aligning with this community feel that a school should bring. And I think is one of the things that schools were designed to do. It was designed to bring people together, to have them learn not just about the curriculum and not just about what we think they might need in the future, because that's what it is. It's what we think they might need, along with some stuff that we actually know they don't need, which is a real shame. But it's about the people you're going to work with and the cultures of those people and their backgrounds and how that might influence you and your ability to make change in the world. So it's really, the connection curriculum is about actually following through on that idea of building the whole person. If we're going to have this holistic approach to education, then there should be a holistic approach to education. We should be focusing on the people first. And then once we have that understanding, then we can really build a school that can impact those people rather than, the people coming in and being told what to do or impacted upon rather than having the impact themselves. And so it's certainly everything. It really is that idea of how are you going to grow today rather than what might you be educated on? What will you learn rather than what are you going to be taught?
Gorgeous. Well, it connects so well to how we know we learn. Like even just the structures of our brain are meant to make connections. We don't learn in a silo. So I think that it makes sense that it's both relationships and the conceptual academic connections, because you can't really have one without the other.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's, I don't like the idea of education being like this one box that we're trying to put everyone into. So connection allows us to have that empathy and understanding for the people around us, and it actually opens other boxes and other opportunities. And one of the things that, as we are increasingly more digital in the way we communicate, it's about having an understanding of perspectives and opinions. And if you don't understand the people around you and why they may feel the way they feel, then it makes it really hard to get along. And I think get along is what I'm aiming for. I'm not aiming for best friends. I'm not aiming for, anything more than that. We just need to have an understanding of the people around us so that we have that context. And then that allows us to be partners in this experience. And we learn most from each other.
Oh, so, definitely.
Yeah. So we have to understand the people. And that was the inspiration for the book. And so trying to kickstart, I guess, a shift back towards that.
Love it. You begin your book with your non-negotiables, which I thought was really cool. Might you share a little bit about what they are, why exactly they're so non-negotiable? Like, where do they come from?
So the book comes out of a few master's degrees that I've done. I'm studying my doctorate at the moment, and all of the change leadership or change management or just change in general, all that theory, that academic work, it points to some really clear things that all change processes have to embrace. But in every other industry, I think they're able to accept that these are the things that you need to just be happy or unhappy that they exist, but they're there. And so they have to be managed and you have to work around them. So the non-negotiables in the connection curriculum are the four that I think we don't do very well in schools. And I think we occasionally believe we do, or we tell ourselves we do, but I don't think we manage them well. So the first one is constant reflection. I think we reflect almost like what you were saying before, Cindy. We reflect in silos. We reflect when we're told to, or we reflect in very specific spaces, either individually or, with a student or with a parent in a meeting. In these situations where we force ourselves to reflect, but really effective change processes, they reflect just constantly throughout, and it's not provoked. It's not, always formal reflection. It is just it's this habitual reflection that becomes a part of what you do. And so that to me is the first non-negotiable. If you're not ready to reflect, and start with reflection and be really honest about how your school or your community, how it is right now, then you're not going to be ready to make any kind of change. If your school is known as a certain thing, or it's got some really either positive or negative characteristics really closely tied to it, and that is well known in the community, and you know it and everyone else knows it, but you're not willing to put that on the table and accept it, then whatever change you're trying to make or you're saying you're trying to make is probably not going to work. And so you need to reflect from the start and just continue to do it, even when things are really not favorable. It's, we constantly ask our students, or we try and impress on them, you must reflect and you have to be okay with failure. But schools don't do a great job of doing that themselves. When there is a failure or something that needs to be worked on,
hide from it.
Yeah, it's quite often just tucked away in the boardroom and it'll be addressed. But then the community gets the strategy. This is how we're going to do this and we're going to address this. And it's not really about, well, what was the impetus for it? What's the reason we need to do this? And so then that doesn't really work in trying to, create a call to action for teachers either, because it just looks like another initiative that you have to put in place. Right. So constant reflection, being realistic is the second one. I love a really creative vision statement and mission statements and all of these things that are, that combination of marketing versus trying to, have a direction for your school. But I just feel like that they can be too idealistic. And again, not rooted in the things that make your school who it is, even if that is not what you want right now again. So being realistic about what can we do in the short term. Well, that's not ideal. What can we do in the short term? And then what can we do in the long term? And then again, reflecting on that at certain periods and saying, well, what did we meet and what did we not meet? Let's be realistic about the great things we've achieved, but also about the things that we haven't achieved yet. And I think haven't achieved yet is the most realistic approach for schools to take. And that's what we should be doing. Because again, these non-negotiables are all modeled on things we tell the students.
Right.
You haven't achieved this, milestone yet, but I will help you get there. Schools need help too, and they need to kind of practice what they preach. And so being realistic about who you are, what you'd like to be, who your community is made up of, where its shortfalls are, where its huge wins are. And then what is a realistic approach to get the change moving, rather than what is the big idea at the end of the journey, that or the the big checkered flag. What are you aiming for? So realism is just not a place that schools live in. I don't think they live in realism. But if they did, I think they'd be more effective. So in going into the book, that's why these things are up the front, I suppose. Embracing the risks. I talk about something called protective mode in this section at the front of the book. And we need to be protective of a school's image and the messages that go out, and obviously protect the children and protect our staff. And, I've worked in schools that have some really vulnerable members of the community, and you need to protect them. And there's lots of things to protect, but there's also a space for some really positive risk-taking. And if you're going to make change, you have to take risks. You have to try things. And I think once you've accepted, or you find yourself in a place where you can reflect, once you are happy to be realistic about what that process looks like, then you also have to break a few rules, and you have to go and embrace some risks that are not going to cause harm, but are going to challenge the way your community thinks. Because if we don't change how everyone is thinking, we're not going to change the way they behave, and then we're not going to change their beliefs. And if we can't get to the point where all those three things are impacted, then we're not going to actually make change that's sustainable. And in terms of connection, if we don't hit those three markers, then it doesn't work. There won't be connection. There will be some perhaps greater bonds between certain groups, certain people. But every year the school community changes. No matter what your school is, it could be, primary school, secondary school, early learning. Every year a school community changes. And so the common line of connection needs to be strong so that those who are joining the community are aligning themselves to something that is established, and those who are leaving with their own little thread that follows them through the rest of their life. I think in the book, I say something along the lines of, you want them to leave and feel like they can always come back. Mm-hmm. That to me is what a school should be. It should be something that is, if this is somewhere around 13 years of your life, definitely it's about 13 here in Australia. If that's, 13 years of your life is significant, and it shouldn't just feel like it's something that's, off in the distance. It should feel important, and it should be significant, and it should be the stepping stone to all the other brilliant things that you're going to do. And the last non-negotiable.
Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Toddle, your all-in-one teaching and learning platform for K-12 schools, made for teachers and by teachers. At Toddle, we have the big, hairy, audacious goal of saving teachers 10 hours per week, all through the power of AI. If you want to learn more, check us out at ToddleApp.com. Now, let's jump back into my conversation with Matt Pitman.
The last non-negotiable is just managing the effective use of time, which is a bit controversial. It's the one that I was the most nervous about putting in the book, because time is such a sensitive topic in all industries, but I think in education. But I don't, there's no more time. We don't have any more time that I'm aware of. We can't create more of it. So we have to be more effective with our use of it. And I think that's a conversation that we need to have more broadly. There are some really exciting innovations and all kinds of things around AI that might free up some time. But I think an honest conversation about what are you doing with your time is a really great place to start before you start any kind of change process or approach, or even just a strategy. Planning where you might actually make this work, instead of just putting it on top of things that are already happening, and then
fold it in.
Yeah, and then obviously then having that conversation, a week or two or a month or whatever it might be, about, I don't have time for this. It's the ultimate, destroyer of any change is a lack of planning around time. And I think teachers are such an interesting, and leaders and support staff, anyone that works in schools, I think we're so bad at managing time, because if I could give everyone who works in a school an extra 6 hours in a week, we'd fill it
quickly.
We'd fill that 6 with something. And not all of it is necessary. And I think that speaks to the bigger problem around the time conversation. If we could have endless amounts of time and fill every minute of it, then there are things there that don't need to be there, because not all of that is going to add value to the students. which is what a school should be doing. And so if it's not adding value to the students, then it can probably go, and that will free up time for the change. They're the non-negotiables. And I think if you are, as an individual or as a school community, going to enact any kind of change, especially around connection, it needs to be the most important thing you're doing. And so addressing those is the way to making that not just, the first bullet point on a PowerPoint slide or whatever it might be, but it's actually the thing that you're working towards, and it makes it real and it makes it felt. They're the things that we need to work on.
Well, and it's fun because they mirror assessment best practices in essence. The things that we want our students to be able to do well, we're saying as leaders, we value that in the change management process as well.
Yeah. Practice what you preach is so important.
Oh, so important. Yeah, to really walk the walk. So I would love to get into a little bit of just the benefits of, a connected curriculum, of a curriculum of belonging. And I wondered, because this is a study I've been citing a lot lately in the world of AI, but have you seen the cheating studies from Stanford?
No, I haven't. I'm very interested to hear about it, though.
They're really cool. So they did a study for 20 years. They've been studying cheating, like why kids cheat, how often they cheat. And they gave each kid like self-reported. So in the last month, would you say that you've cheated in a class, self-reporting? And so what they found, what percentage would you guess before AI entered the picture, what percentage of kids do you think would say, yes, they cheated in the last month?
Oh, I don't know, maybe 60%, I think. It really depends on what cheating is.
It's just if students self-define that they engage in a behavior they would define as cheating.
Maybe higher than that though. I'll stay with 60.
Yeah, 60 to 70%.
Okay.
And then what's interesting is they did the same studies post AI, and because everyone's saying, oh, all the kids are going to use AI to cheat, and guess what the percentage was in the post AI world?
In higher, I assume, like 80.
Actually, the exact same, 60 to 70%. So the takeaway from their study, though, was that when they asked the kids, like, why do you cheat versus not cheat in classes, the research is clear, is that when students feel a sense of belonging, connection, meaning, and purpose in their work, that's when they don't cheat. So I think the takeaway for teachers, it's not the tool. It's not kids are cheating now because of AI. They've been cheating. So the impetus shifts onto us to say, okay, well then based on that research, how do we create assessments that create belonging, connection, and meaning? So are there other kind of cool studies like that have come up in your research on belonging and meaning and connection?
Yeah, so the big things that I find really interesting is that we're having a lot of issues around retention at the moment in terms of staff retention, leadership retention, student retention. I know there's a lot of movement between schools and those people that have been really passionate educators for such a long time are going off into other industries. And that's been, I guess, a factor for a long, long time, but not at this rate. I know universities are struggling to first obtain keen, young people to go into teaching, but then also hold on to them throughout their degree. So when you have strong relationships and a sense of belonging, and then you attach everything to meaning, which is kind of the framework the book follows, you create safe places for people and safe places for them to work, safe places for them to come in and learn, because learning's such a vulnerable thing. You really have to open yourself up to what you know and what you don't know. And I work with teenagers, and for them to open up to anything, they're not wired to do that. They are going into their shell a little bit. And when they, quite often when they do show confidence, it's a protective factor. It's, they're very unsure of themselves. They're going through all kinds of things that are not within their control. And then we're asking them to, show what you know and what you don't know. If you have a strong relationship with anyone in your school community, but also on top of that, you've been able to progress it to, this is a place that I belong to, and then the work I'm doing has meaning and it will contribute to community, or it'll contribute to other people beside me, or it'll contribute to my own work. And so the research says that if you are able to build these things and you can progress through these landmarks on this journey of connection, then you will hold on to those communities, because we're hardwired to want to belong to the people around us. It's a survival factor. It is about just belonging to something and knowing that you are a part of something bigger. That's really important for us as humans. And so then if schools can create that, all of these issues, there's a huge umbrella of issues that can be addressed just by addressing connection. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about it. Because if you look at your strategic plans and you look at the 3-4 big things that you want to address next year, you could probably address connection and start building on all 4 of those, rather than perhaps at the end of the year reflecting on the 1 or 2 of the 4 that you were able to achieve.
Yeah, totally.
So focus on the people is the big message, and you will see improvements to your people.
Love that. I'd love to get into your framework, my friend. So you've got the connected curriculum broken into 3 dimensions, and you start with identity and purpose, which I don't think is, like revolutionary. I think identity, purpose, like everyone's on board, I think, with the why. But might you get into practically, like, what does this really look like in our schools to begin with a sense of identity and purpose?
Yeah, so the book actually starts, I think we have a lot of conversations in education about identity from a very individual level. And
Right.
so I wanted to start, the first focus area of the book is school identity.
Cool.
And I think the big idea is, how can we expect our community to be connected if that community doesn't have a shared understanding of who they are, or what they are, where they'd like to be. So that first kind of step for me is to actually get that community together, or at least a bigger sample than what would usually go into that decision-making kind of situation, which is quite often just your leaders. And not all of your leaders, often it's just your senior leaders, and they will talk about, well, what is needed, and they'll look at the very specific data that they've collected. But for me, like, the community has the data. And so a school is just a reflection of the community it belongs to. So then what's happening out in the community, to perhaps a reduced extent, but it will reflect what's happening within your school community. And it should. And so if everyone in that community is unsure of what the school is, like even from really basic things like, is it about academics? Is it about well-being? Is it about both? Can you effectively do both? That's a huge argument that has been researched for years and years and years and years. Can you balance everything? Can you have, how much of a good thing can you actually have? But if you're unsure, if a parent is enrolling their child and they're unsure, then that to me is a big red flag. If a new staff member's coming in and you're not able to talk about and share what the school is and its identity and where it's been, where it is, and where it would like to be, then that is a big red flag for me. So instead of focusing on just building the individual, which is what schools have become, they've become about, how many capabilities and capacities can we build in this young person before we send them off into the world? And what about building the capabilities and capacities of your whole community and doing it in consultation with each other?
So practically, how do you do that work of defining who you are? Like, is it just a matter of storytelling? Is it a matter of data collection, surveys? Like, yes, yes.
Yeah, I know. I think you collect as much data as you can at the start, and then and that will tell you what the story is. So I think the storytelling approach is so valuable.
Hmm.
And schools are all quite good at telling a story, but it's might be the story that they've been telling for 20 years. Yeah, is that who your school is now? Is that story actually where you're at? Are you telling the tale of the first 10 cohorts that went through and graduated, and you're trying then to force that onto anyone else that joins your community? Finding out what the story is now and how that might contribute to the journey going forward. That's the way to do it. And so I think you get opinions from parents that are not about learning. Quite often the parents come in for parent teacher conferences and maybe an information night, but it's quite often information going this way.
Right.
It's going to the parent. They're being told, again, like the student is told in the classroom, the parent is now being taught about their young person, but actually open up a dialogue and model that vulnerability and collect it electronically, collect it in person if you're really brave. Have that town hall, which really shows commitment in my opinion, that if you're willing to put yourself on the stage and just go hand over the microphone. I mean, in terms of reflection, in terms of being realistic, in terms of managing your time and offering your time, those are huge, gestures that could lead to building trust. But it's also a really difficult thing to do. But collect as much data as you possibly can about how do you see this school? How do you think it reflects? We might have 3 values. How do you think the school is reflected in these values? And encourage honesty. Do it anonymously if you need to, but collect as much data as you can, put all of that data together. And instead of just looking at, teaching and learning, look at your community and look at the things that drive the teaching and learning. Get it from your staff, get it from your students, and see then how that aligns with the story you're telling now, and make the changes to the story to reflect your current, state of community, and evolve your story. Your school identity will evolve. The story needs to evolve.
That would be my next question, because the second dimension is adaptability. And I think there's a tension that exists in schools between like preserving our identity and our values as a school and being adaptable for the future. So how do you strike that balance?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to be okay with it being really messy. I think we like things to be really organized and structured, and that's not how effective change works. If in all of the books and the documentaries and the what have you that I've been through, all these big organizations or these civilizations that have been through significant change, it's not always planned to the absolute minute, and there are things that happen that are actually the things that create the change in the long run. It's you need to adapt. Teachers, we adapt every day. We go in the classroom and we're constantly adapting. But then when we're talking about whole school initiatives, we don't adapt in the same way.
Right. We set the goal at the start of the year and then we just trot on towards it.
Correct. But we can adapt in the same way. We just have to, again, reflect and consult with the other people, because we're not the only person in the room kind of leading that space. And so instead of having, a whole hour of compliance, open up some of your staff meeting or whatever it might be, your briefing, to some questions and some exploration, and allow teachers to actually have a professional conversation in a space where they can share that conversation, not in the staff room in the corner where, they're a bit disgruntled and they're having that conversation in private. Create a space for students to have their opinion. I think being adaptable is how we survive through life. Like if it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be something that is heavily structured. It's just, it's the same as identity, what we were saying before. If what you're seeing and what you're saying isn't aligned with what things actually are represented by, then you need to adapt to what it's actually represented by. Otherwise, it's all disingenuous. And communities know when they're getting, the big spiel. If you want belonging and you want people to attach themselves and feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, then they have to believe in that thing. And they have to know that when you're speaking to them about it, that it is honest. And if that honesty is, we're going through this big period of change and where we want to get here, but we're unsure of some of the steps, and we'll communicate with you and you'll be a part of it, then that's a big step towards community adaptability. Whereas I think adaptability in schools, again, is the decision of a very small group of people, and then you're told what you're doing. You're not given the opportunity to adapt. You're told, this is what we are doing, and you're going to enact this decision, rather than being a part of the decision.
Well, which really connects to your final dimension, which is autonomy. So you're touching on this idea that instead of decisions being in the hands of very few and being kind of decreed from on high, that we're wanting to increase that sense of ownership and autonomy. So what does that practically look like?
I think it starts in the classroom, and it is about making sure that we're actually giving students voice and permission to be the driver of their learning. There are certain standards and there are things that we have to meet, and we will guide those students towards those. But why does the practice of teaching have to be so rigid? Why can't we create a space in a lesson where, you've delivered whatever you need to deliver, directly. You've given them the background. You've completed some application tasks and helped them to explore that. Why not then ask them, well, what are you interested there and where do you want to go?
Right.
And give them some time to do it. That is a level of permission that students don't often have. So then the student becomes not just a follower of instruction.
Right.
Now, even for that little section, just to start at the end of the lesson, they get to explore the thing that sparked their interest, and they get to be curious, not just, a recipient of information, but a finder of information that means something to them.
I think it's interesting that you argue that it comes from the classroom first, because I would almost see it the opposite way, that as a school leader, if I start making the space in the staff meeting to say, hey, these are the patterns in the data we're noticing, this is what we're hoping we're moving towards, you tell us how we get there, you tell us what gaps we're missing. I think if I'm hearing that in a staff meeting as a teacher, I'm far more inclined to then bring that spirit of autonomy into my classroom. So I see it more like a top down, but you see it more as the bottom up. So just get curious your thinking there.
Yeah, well, I think it happens at the same time. I think, but the students are the ones that have the least voice in their education, and so I think that if you're, looking to, for a student, the first place of connection is the classroom, right? And so if you're going to connect the largest component of your community, which will be the students, because they far outnumber the adults in most schools that I'm aware of. Like, connect your students to the classroom and work through that strong relationship. Teachers are great at building relationships, but we need to progress that relationship to, well, this learning space is a space I belong to. It's not just a place I attend. And then now this learning has meaning because I'm being given the opportunity to find the meaning in the learning. If you can do that in classrooms, then you can do that in the staff room and you can do that in the staff meeting. But there has to be, I think one of the things that has progressed my thinking since the book was published is I think teachers are more willing to take a risk and change something in the space that they control.
Right.
Whereas leaders, because of things that are placed upon leaders, because of historical leadership, traits, characteristics, whatever the correct term might be, may feel less inclined. So empower your teachers. If you're like, the ideal situation is the one that you described. You would say, we're all the adults. We frame what this school can be. So let's make the change at this level. But if that's not a reality, then start in your classroom. And I think that for, teachers and teacher leaders and those listening, I think that is, if you're not seeing those non-negotiables being embraced, then create a space where you can embrace them and be the role model for those around you. And I think the leaders of those teachers, if you've got those teachers in your teams, then you embrace that and you foster that curiosity, because teachers need to be curious too, way more curious than what we are. So the leader's job is to empower that and create that space. And then your job as the leader is to deliver that and say, this is what we're working on in our team. And I think that it could change the way we understand our school. And then build it up from the bottom. I think I'd love for it to come from the top, but if it's not working, the leader's job is to find those that are ready and encourage them to start making changes so that you have that data. We've had far too many initiatives, I'm assuming. I mean, I feel very confident in what I'm about to say, but there's far too many initiatives that have just stopped, that haven't gone anywhere, that have been add-ons with very little value. There've been things that have been potentially forced on the school, and there's mandates and all of these things, but the connection can't be one of those. So if you're not able to, perhaps because of the size of your school, but if as the school leader, you're not able to create enough movement on this connection journey, then start from the bottom. Shift your teachers to the ones that are now the experts, and they have the knowledge. They're the ones with the primary data. They're in the classroom. Empower your middle leaders to become, the cultivators of that enthusiasm and to be the support. And then you as the school leader, you now become the one who helps them action it across the school. So
you're amplifying success and amplifying this. Yeah.
Well, you're flipping that decision-making model. Instead of making the decision at the top and feeding that down, you've flipped it, and it's almost like a funnel, and you're trying to catch everything from your teachers and feed it down so that you can then change the story, then, create the circumstances that would allow you to be adaptable and to foster that autonomy. So yeah, I mean, there's not, and this is something I say in the book too, there's not one way to do it. And it's and the book was never intended to be a prescribed, checklist of this is how you connect to people, because if I think about every connection I have and the relationships I have, they're all different. And they've all been formed differently under different circumstances with different characteristics, and some of them fall away and some of them have been held on to. And that's the same of whole school connection. You need to find the method that works for you. But if it's something that's really important to you, then it's not working top down, as other decisions may have in the past, then you need to find other avenues to get that work going. So maybe start with your teachers, because if you've got some really effective educators who are really keen and maybe already showing that they can develop these strong relationships and create safe places for everyone that they impact upon, start with them and make them the model to build the change up, rather than kind of bringing it down.
Very cool. Yeah, I think there's just such a beautiful thread of curiosity that just goes through the entire thing. That it seems like curiosity and connection just really beautifully go hand in hand. So just thank you so much for bringing this, I think, this idea to the surface and giving it some love and attention. And I hope that in the next year we see more focus on community and connection.
Yeah, I really hope so. I think it's, people are so important to schools, and it's such a people-focused, industry that isn't people-focused enough. And I think, for, again, people to be leaving such an incredible, workplace, an opportunity to really impact on a community, we can fix it. We can make it, something that brings value to every single person. And that's what learning should be, and that's what a school should be. It should be a place that supports that endeavor.
Beautiful. Love it. Thanks so much, Matt. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Awesome.